answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay, I think we're recording.
basically, the idea is, choose wisely when it comes to carbs, not avoid them completely for most people. Yeah.
Hi, Mama.
Couscous made.
Couscous is made from refined flour, semolina flour. Yeah,
Okay.
so it's a white flour product.
It's a white flour
Yeah.
product. Somebody was asking me the other day, and I said, I have no idea.
Because
Yeah.
Trader Joe's has whole wheat.
They do have whole wheat,
couscous.
yeah, and it's going to be made from a whole wheat flour. But again, the more
Again,
processed the grain, even a whole wheat flour, it is very processed.
Yeah.
Even though it has the fiber intact, the body. The thing with getting carbs that are less processed, such as grains, whole grains versus a flour, even if it's a whole grain flour, is that it costs the body work to get at that starch. And so we will access less of it, and we will work more to get it, and there'll be a slower release of it. And that's beneficial for blood sugar stability, it's beneficial for satiation and satiety. So that's my answer to that question. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Yeah,
It
okay.
did.
So backing up a little bit, I'm Trina Higgins. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I've worked in nutrition for about 10 years in various settings, hospitals, clinics. I've taught nutrition and other sciences in college settings, and currently I work at the Northern California Center for Wellbeing in San Jose. I teach health education classes and do one-on-one nutrition therapy with patients, and my focus clinically is integrative health, weight management, and prevention and management of chronic diseases such as diabetes and heart disease. And tonight, again, this is the first of 4 presentations, and we're going to focus tonight on the topic of mindful eating. I'm starting with this topic. We're going to talk about 4 different approaches to mindful eating that can really help us to tune in and figure out what's best for us. Because we can break down nutrition from the perspective of proteins, carbs, fats, calories, grams, milligrams, and sometimes we get lost in the minutia, and what is often left out is what's happening in here. This element of mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply being aware or conscious of something, the state of being aware or conscious of something. And so in mindful eating, we're talking about being mindful of our food choices, but not only that, also mindful of how we respond to them, how we feel after we eat them, how we feel in the moment of eating them, how we approach eating them. And in our modern lives, there are many things to sort of take us away from that experience. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those distractions that can trip us up. Oh, I have a handout here that you might find useful. I haven't gotten one yet. So, all of us are born with an innate ability to know when we're hungry, when we're satisfied, when we need to eat more of something, when we don't need to eat more of something. And through life, often beginning in childhood, that kind of gets drilled out of us. We're told to finish something on our plates, we're told we have to eat something, then we grow up and we read a nutrition magazine, and then we think, oh, I have to follow this diet to be healthy, and then we kind of lose track of how we're feeling about it internally, and how the body's actually responding to that. And so what I find in my work with patients is once we sort out sort of the basics of nutrition, often that's the missing element that really, once it is adopted, helps people to bring it all together for themselves. Because there are many, many different opinions on what is a healthy diet, what is the best diet. Some people do really well on a very low-carb keto regimen. Some people don't. Some people crash. Some people need more carb. And it's simply related to how people metabolize, and we're all individual like that. Some people do really well on a vegetarian diet. Some people really don't. And nobody's wrong. It's just a matter of figuring out really what works best for us. And the good news is that it's not just a total random, well, we'll just figure it out and it's totally different for each person. There's definitely some guidelines that are going to steer you in the right direction, and a lot of those are found in the AbDom nutrition guide for those of you who are doing AbDom. And if you're interested in attending more talks, we'll talk more about like the macronutrients and that type of proportioning at our next talk. So we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of that question later on. But we're going to approach this mindful eating thing from 4 different angles. We're going to talk, in front of you have this handout. We're going to talk about the difference between physical and emotional hunger, We're going to talk about food cues, what are external food cues, and how to sort of outwit them. We are going to talk about strategies to help control appetite and strategies for portion control as well. And then we're also going to talk finally about the benefits of keeping a food log. Okay, I'm sorry. No, don't worry about it. Here's a handout. I'm Trina.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is Nayeli.
Hi, Nayeli. I think you might have met the other day.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we're just introducing the topic. Today's topic is mindfulness, and we're just getting into it. So give us some time. So let's start out by talking about the information on this handout. So the difference between physical and emotional hunger. So this might be the difference between like physical hunger and appetite. So just to sort of put this into context that we all probably understand, if you go to a restaurant and you have a big meal and you finish the meal, maybe you haven't even been able to finish all the food on the plate. And then plates get cleared, you're feeling good, you're feeling full, and then the waiter comes around with the dessert menu. And in that moment, none of us would think that we are hungry. However, we have an appetite for something, and there's something going on elsewhere in the body, maybe the brain, where we want to eat something even in the absence of hunger. And that's totally normal. It's not bad. It's just that if we do that a lot, it can add up for us. And there are many other ways in which we eat in the absence of hunger, and there are many other triggers for us that can lead to that can over time compromise our health. So let's take a look at this little table here. So physical hunger builds gradually. You eat a meal, you're not going to be hungry right away, and if it's a nice balanced meal, you're probably not going to be hungry for a couple hours, if not several hours.
That's right. Tell them to shut up.
Emotional hunger develops suddenly. So you're walking down the street and you pass the ice cream shop and you get the waft of like waffle cone cloud on the air, and then suddenly you want some ice cream and a waffle cone. So this is not something that you were gradually building toward, it's something that hit you just like that. Physical hunger strikes below the neck, meaning you feel physically hungry, you feel a sense of emptiness in the stomach. If we go to an extreme, we might feel like shaky, or we might feel weak, we might feel even dizzy. But emotional hunger strikes above the neck, meaning that it's in our minds, right?
Salivary glands.
Yes, exactly. It's visual cues. It's if we see something that looks tasty. Maybe we're hearing something like sizzling in the kitchen. Maybe we are smelling something like the waffle cones or something else delicious baking. Maybe, for me, I have had to discipline myself not to read food magazines at night because I will inevitably go and get a snack. So physical hunger, like I said, builds gradually, occurs several hours after a meal. Emotional hunger, on the contrary, can happen randomly at any time. Physical hunger goes away when we are full. Emotional hunger does not. It persists despite our being full. And physical hunger, when we eat, it leads to a feeling of satisfaction. Emotional hunger, often when we eat under those circumstances, can for some of us lead to a sense of guilt or shame or regret or even disgust. So it can be actually a negative experience if we're eating for emotional reasons or reasons other than hunger. Not always. Thanksgiving, maybe it's a joyful occasion and it's a normal thing as human beings for us to feast. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the other circumstances where we might not feel so great after eating when we're not hungry. So a little bit lower on the handout, circumstantial triggers. Being aware of emotional and circumstantial triggers, meaning like some sort of environmental factor, some sort of outside factor that can trigger episodes of eating without hunger, is really helpful. So that awareness, that mindfulness. Even if we do nothing about it at first, noticing that it's happening is a huge first step toward choosing something else in the long run. Does anybody here have recognized like a circumstantial trigger here, like a situation in which you might be triggered to eat something on this list here? So in front of the TV,
It's not all
movies and parties. Yep.
For me, the biggest one is when I drink alcohol.
Yeah.
I drink a glass of wine immediately. Like I have no control. It's like I just want.
Yeah, that's interesting. So alcohol is it's actually a central nervous system depressant, and the first thing that it hits is our inhibitions.
Yeah.
So we might otherwise be trying to, moderate what we're eating around certain things, and then we have a drink, and then some of that goes out the window.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, very common.
I get that too.
What happens at movies for you?
I always go for the popcorn.
Popcorn. Yep.
I have found that road trips or even like long plane trips, I just want to eat junk food, and I never want to eat junk food.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like the crunchy, salty.
Yeah.
Thing.
Mhm.
That's sometimes
Like that trail mix that's really just peanuts and M&Ms.
Yeah. Yes. So, there are a lot of circumstantial triggers that might do it. For me, I'm really, even though I practice this and I teach this, I really have to fight myself not to eat my lunch at my desk because I want to keep working, or I just want to, get through this thing, and I'm just going to snack on this. Even if I eat an appropriate amount of food at that time, the thing is that part of our satisfaction from eating comes from the sensory enjoyment. So when we're at the movies and we're doing the popcorn, when we are sitting at our desks and eating, when we're watching TV and eating, the focus of the mind is not on the food. And depending on what the distraction is, if it's a stressful distraction, it can actually make our digestion worse because the body digests better in a state of rest and focus on the food. Actually, a lot of our release of digestive juices and hormones that promote good digestion start with stimulus in the brain, so meaning like the smell of the food, the taste of the food. It's actually called a cephalic phase of digestion, the head phase, that triggers good digestion. So when I'm eating my lunch at my desk, I'm focusing on something completely different. Right. I'm not noticing, I'm not chewing very well probably. I could experience maybe some heartburn because my stomach isn't ready for the food. There are a lot of downstream effects that can happen to digestion. But then in terms of like regulating what we're eating and making sure that we're not eating in excess, when we haven't really fully experienced that meal, then it leads us to seek that experience, continue to seek that experience. So if we're eating while distracted, we often will continue to be snacky after the meal, even if we've eaten enough that would technically satisfy our hunger, because we haven't really fully experienced that meal. So part of mindful eating is really tuning in. Actually, one thing that I often recommend for patients is sit down and take a deep breath, or maybe breathe. Get into that relaxation, rest, and digest phase, and that will help improve your digestion. It'll help trigger you to kind of tune in on a sensory level to your food, and it will help you to feel more satisfied from the meal if you're able to do that. So one thing that happens also when we're eating distractedly is we're not noticing whether we're full or not, whether we've eaten an appropriate amount or not. So, my example of taking my lunch to work, I already have it portioned out, right? I already packed it. There's a finite amount of food I can eat in that moment. But that's not always the case. We might have a thing of popcorn this big, or we might have some other snack or some other food that we have in a large portion in front of us. And if we're not paying attention, then we can easily go past the point of where we would otherwise maybe stop. What about emotional triggers? Has anybody heard of this thing called emotional eating?
I think I do.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm stressed out. Maybe more junk.
Yeah. What kind of things do you feel like you gravitate toward?
French fries.
Yeah. That's a classic one.
Yeah.
The carbs and the salt and the
Carbs
fat.
and salt.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there are totally physiological reasons for that. All those things help to calm the experience of stress in the brain. And that's something that's been researched, actually, that stressed animals will tend to gravitate toward those things, and that they are calmed by it. Anybody else have that experience? Yeah.
Sugar.
Sugar.
If I'm stressed.
Yeah.
I start craving sugar.
Yeah.
I like
Absolutely.
Chocolate.
ice cream for
Ice
like
cream.
more, but I'm less stress triggered and more like just wanting to be comforted, I guess.
Yeah.
Comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, comfort foods have that name for a reason,
Mhm.
right? So, when we can identify our own emotional triggers, maybe there are specific circumstances that bring that up for each of us, and starting to notice those can be very powerful to help us think about what other tools we might accumulate in our toolbox. So if we have a hammer and that's all we have, then all we're going to do is this, right? So if eating is the way that we are accustomed to soothing ourselves, then that's the main tool that we use, then that's going to be our go-to sort of coping strategy, right? And what we know about coping strategies is that we don't want to take one away before we put something else in its place, right? So what are some other coping strategies that can help sort of mitigate the stress in the moment that are alternatives?
Going for a walk.
Going for a walk. Exercise is an excellent one because it does the dual purpose of taking us away from the food, and it actually has been shown to lower the experience of stress and the physiological effects of stress. So that's a great one.
Deep
Breathing.
breathing.
Breathing exercises.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anything else?
Maybe meditation.
Maybe
Maybe
meditation.
meditation.
Exposure to nature. I know it's part
Yeah,
of going to walk,
that's-
but
Being
Getting
outside.
sunshine.
Getting away from the kitchen, even just like putting distance between yourself and the food is something that can help us actually kind of forget that craving. And what we usually recommend is just realize that if you distance yourself from it and ride it out, the craving will subside. But it's a practice, and it's something that comes with practice, and we don't get it perfect all the time, and that's okay. But as we sort of tip the scales toward practicing it more often than not, then we can grow that muscle, just like we grow a muscle by working it in the gym. So what I often suggest is take a moment, after this class or whenever it works for you, and think about what your triggers are. Just kind of brainstorm a few, write them down, and then brainstorm a few tools that might work for you. They're not going to be the same tools as everybody else's. Everybody's got their individual things that work. Take a shower. I love taking a hot shower. Read a book. Do something in the garden. There are a million things that we can do besides eat to cope with that moment. And there's the moment. The moment is about not only addressing the stress. Sometimes we can't do anything about the stress. Sometimes the stress exists, or the stressor. But what we can do something about is our response to it. So, questions so far? Any thoughts, comments?
After this, can we send out sort of like a worksheet with those kinds of things on it?
Yeah, definitely. One tool that I don't know if any of you might have heard of before. Did you have a question?
Oh yeah, just like I have a problem like saying no to people like offering me food. So like maybe like ways of like learning how to say no.
Anybody have a suggestion?
I usually say, no, sorry, I'm kind of watching what I eat. I can't do that right now. I'm like, I don't care if they feel bad. I'm like, sorry, I'm not eating that.
What kinds of things? What kinds of things are people offering?
Sugar stuff.
Is it like gifts, or is it just like in passing?
Just like my friend, like when I go over to hang out at his house and stuff like that. Sometimes I've already like eaten dinner and he's like, just have some of this, just have some of this too, and I'm like, but I'm kind of tired and I don't really want to eat any like more food.
You say I already eat?
Yeah.
I'm kind
They
of
already ate.
What is it that's hard about saying no for you? What is it that worries you?
Well, like, cause they're offering me something and like I don't, like it feels like they want to take care of me and like I don't want to, let them take care of me.
Are you concerned about hurting their feelings?
Probably.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll take a hug instead. No.
Well, it sounds like you really want to take care of the people around you, and I think that that's a loving instinct. At the same time, it's super important to take care of our own boundaries and our own selves, and so figuring out a balance there. knowing that that person is trying to care for you and what you really need is actually not what that person is offering, to honor that instinct of that person to care for you is to say, no, actually, this is what I really need right now. And, if that person is a genuine friend with your best interests at heart, I would think that person is understanding.
And maybe also letting them know before you arrive. Like, you're going over there and you can just let them know, I already ate. Don't make any extra.
Yeah. There you go.
That's
Preload.
Yeah.
Happened to me at a friend's house.
I'll
They
take a
made
doggy
whole
bag.
pot of French press coffee, and I made coffee for you. It's 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah. It can be hard, it can be hard, depending, on the culture that we come from as well. Saying no to food that's offered can be very problematic.
Yes.
My background is half Jewish, and we don't even go there.
Yeah, in India you just can't say. Yeah, in India you can't say no.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I think that in the end, I think it's super important to take care of ourselves, because we can't take care of others unless we're taking care of ourselves. And it's kind of cliche, but it's also very true. So yeah, it can be challenging, but also I work with patients from cultures whose families are very difficult to say no to in social situations, and what we work on is model the behavior that you also want your family to feel comfortable doing, and that can sometimes help. Anyway, hope that was helpful for you. I know that can be a challenging one.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So one tool when we are in the moment of going for food that it can be very helpful is just a quick check-in. So down here at the bottom of the page, there's a little image with a HALT B, which is an acronym that stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or bored. And this is an acronym actually that's used in a variety of circumstances, and in this case we're applying it to food. So this acronym is just something that sometimes I have people put on a little Post-it, stick to their pantry or stick to their fridge, just to remind ourselves it doesn't take long. It takes only a few seconds to check in and ask, am I really hungry? Or is there something else going on? And the more we practice that, the more we get in tune to what's happening in here and what's happening in here. And then if we build our toolbox with other alternatives on how to address that, well, I'm not really hungry, I'm actually kind of bored, or I'm kind of anxious, or I feel kind of lonely. What else could I do with that energy? This is not going to probably solve my problem, right? This food. In fact, I might feel worse after I eat it.
Yeah.
So let's not do that. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect about it all the time. And it's not about being perfect. It's about tipping the scales toward behavior and choices that are going to make us feel better in the long run and are going to support our health goals. So we're going to talk a little bit about appetite and just some more fundamentals that can set us up for success under these circumstances. Knowing that we sometimes emotionally eat and sometimes eat because of external cues that don't have anything to do with hunger, to set ourselves up for success, to be able to choose differently. Here are some tips on outwitting hunger pains. So number one, eat protein starting at breakfast. I typically recommend including some form of protein-rich food with every meal and every snack. Protein is super satiating, more so than any other nutrient, although we'll talk about fat as well. That one is a good one for what's called satiety, or the staying power of the meal, because it does stay in the stomach longest. But protein takes a few hours to digest and helps the rest of the meal to sort of be released more slowly nutrient-wise into the body, and so makes the meal more sort of slow release, more sustaining for a longer time. And I've noted a little research here. At St. Louis University, there was a study done where overweight women were given 2 eggs and toast for breakfast, and they ended up eating 267 fewer calories on average throughout the day compared to the women that were given half the amount of protein for breakfast. So often, what are some of the most common breakfasts out there that people are eating?
Bagel.
Cereal, bagel, carbs.
Porridge.
Pancakes. Yeah, most of the time we are lacking protein at breakfast, and so switching that up actually helps in a lot of ways. It can help us to have more stable energy throughout the morning. It helps control appetite. It makes for a more stable blood sugar, which is good for weight management as well. Not only people with diabetes need to be concerned about blood sugar. We all have ups and downs, so protein can help smooth that out. Get enough sleep. Oh man, I can't say enough about the importance of sleep. I listened to an excellent podcast that I recommend for everybody. Maybe I'll share the link. There's a great researcher at UC Berkeley who was interviewed recently on this podcast, and he goes into, it's actually like 6 hours. It's divided up into episodes, but talking about how sleep influences our risk for a variety of chronic illnesses, but also specifically how it impacts our metabolism when we don't sleep enough. We release more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Makes it harder for the body to let go of body fat when we have more cortisol on board. And another hormone called ghrelin, which is our sort of appetite stimulating hormone, also gets higher under circumstances of poor sleep. So on the contrary, when we get enough sleep, we get more leptin release, which is our sort of satiation hormone. It helps to quell appetite. So most adults need at least 7, if not 8 or 9, or in my case, maybe 9.5 hours of sleep.
I'm with you.
Although I rarely get that much. If you're going shorter than 7 or 8 hours, I would reconsider that. Try to get at least 7. Keep foods out of sight. So when we have foods around visually, we go for them more. It can be something like a candy dish at work. It can be something like family-style serving on the table. It's that much easier just to go ahead and serve yourself another portion of food when it's right in front of you. If you have to actually think about it, get up from the table, go back to the kitchen, and get another serving of whatever it is, then it's more steps that you have to kind of power through to get there. It doesn't matter what the food is, if it's in front of us, our normal, natural human instinct is to eat it. We have our sort of prehistoric brains, our sort of reptilian brains, as they're sometimes called, that are more basic drives, and then we have our smart brains, which are the cerebral cortex, the outer portion of the brain. And our drive for hunger, our drive to seek food constantly, was really important when we had to worry about that, when food was scarce. But now that our species has arrived at a place where food is everywhere and abundant, and at least for us in this country for the most part, it's that drive to constantly seek food is no longer serving us, unfortunately. But what we can do is we can engage the cerebral cortex, we can engage the smart brain, and we'll talk about how keeping a food log can help with that as well. But making these choices to set ourselves up for success is a way to sort of get out of that reptilian brain mode. Do something else so that you think about something else. So that's, again, building up your toolbox. What are the other things that you can do when you have that drive to eat something and you know that it's not about being hungry? Use a smaller plate. Some of you have probably heard of this strategy, using smaller dishes, cups, bowls. If you look on a carton of ice cream, the serving size is a half cup, which is the size of about 2 golf balls. So if you put that into a big bowl, that's going to look really sad. If you put that into a little bowl, it's like, oh, okay, that's the amount that's supposed to go in there. If we have little plates, we'll fill them up. If we have big plates, we'll also fill them up. That is just human instinct. And then when we have all that food in front of us, it's also human instinct to just keep eating it. So we've got to, again, work against that basic instinct and put some smart strategies in place. Sit down when you snack or eat generally. When this is, again, sort of engaging that relaxation mode, not eating on the run, not eating while distracted. And it's actually been shown through research that if you use utensils and a plate, even when you're snacking as opposed to like just eating something out of a bag, you will tend to eat less in that moment, and you'll actually feel more satisfied from the snack, and you'll eat less later on. So making a conscious decision to like sit down and enjoy the thing, and maybe use utensils and put it in a bowl or whatever serving plate feels appropriate, that actually has been shown to be helpful. It's so interesting, human behavior. Yeah. It's a lot of psychology eating. Limit your choices. So we've all experienced the buffet effect, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm just gonna get a little of that. Satiety is basically like how long we're satisfied after we're done with the meal. And fat, because it stays in the stomach longer, tends to increase that duration of time in which we feel satisfied from a meal. Often people are scared to eat fat because it's high in calories, it's energy dense. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the different macronutrients in the next talk. But if we're choosing healthy fats, relatively unprocessed fats, not doing fried foods, things like that, avocado, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds. We do have to be careful about the caloric density, because when it comes down to it, weight management and whether you're trying to lose weight or improve your body composition, that piece, caloric intake, calorie intake, is an important thing to consider. But if we eat without fat, then we tend to be less satisfied and we'll tend to actually eat more calories. And healthy fats have been shown to have many, many, many health benefits. So, plug for fats.
So
yes.
for the AbDom, are we talking about limiting calories, or or eating a certain number of calories?
We aren't doing.
Just focusing on eating the right, or just focusing on eating the right foods.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, calorie counting can be a very effective tool for some people, and other people absolutely hate it and it doesn't work at all. It's not that it doesn't work, it's just that it's the focus on the calories is not as productive as maybe other methods. And there's some interesting studies that have come out around using visual models versus calorie counting to help with weight management or weight loss. And what is interesting is that using a plate model, if you're using an appropriately sized plate, like you start with a 9-inch diameter plate, and you're doing that proportioning, half veggies, quarter protein, quarter carb, you are naturally restricting your calories, and it's not restricting, but you're naturally sort of limiting your calories to an appropriate amount, and with the balance of macronutrients on the plate is helping you to stay satiated. And then, understanding, we'll talk a little bit more about portion sizes of fats and what they mean calorically. Having a basic understanding of that, paired with the visual cue of the plate, can help us to control portion sizes without necessarily having to go to the nitty-gritty of counting calories. However, calorie awareness is very important. So, if we're talking about beverages or we're talking about different macronutrient groups, it is interesting and important to be aware of how many calories something is worth. And we'll talk a little bit more about that stuff in the next talk when we get into macronutrients. But did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, long story short, calorie counting can be helpful for some people. For others, it is a focus that just doesn't work.
I mean, it's hard to do it forever.
Yeah.
It's usually you do it when you're trying to lose the weight.
When I work with people around portion control and portion awareness, at first it can feel a little cumbersome, because it's like, well, I'm not going to carry measuring cups wherever I'm going. But as you get used to what a portion size of various things looks like, you can use your body as a cue. Like, the fist, a small fist is usually around the size of a cup. The palm of the hand is usually about the size of 3 ounces, without the fingers and thumb. So, it's something that with practice becomes less cumbersome. And then generally having an awareness of what foods are calorie dense and what foods are not. It's a practice thing.
Right.
So, does that make sense? Okay. So we talked about limiting the frequency of eating to help reduce sort of that accumulation of calories throughout the day mindlessly, but eating often enough is important to help control appetite. So I mentioned before, not going longer than 4 or 5 hours without eating, so that you're not out of control by the time you get to that meal. For some people, a rhythm of like every 2.5 to 3 hours works if they're doing smaller meals. So it does matter, what the size and content of the meal is in terms of the staying power. Maximizing fiber, again, those veggies. We can take advantage of the knowledge that veggies are very light on calories, really rich in fiber. That fiber and all of the volume of the vegetables helps to fill up the stomach with very few calories. And what we know is that we don't tend to eat and be satisfied by a certain number of calories per meal, but rather a certain volume of food. So maximize those veggies. And again, engage the senses. Sit to eat. Take the time with your food. Chew well. Enjoy it. I know personally I really love food. And so it's a shame to waste an opportunity to enjoy it as well. And it will help you to feel more satisfied. So final topic, we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of keeping a food log. So a food log, some of you who saw the AbDom packet might have seen the food log or food record form. And for those who haven't, a food log is simply a record of what we've eaten throughout the day. Has anybody ever tried this activity?
Yeah.
Tell me about your experience.
It was in food and nutrition at the junior college, and we actually had a log with portions, calories, time of day, all of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So was that the one time that you did it?
That was the one time that I did it. And it was for 1 week.
Okay, and so you did it throughout the week?
Throughout the week.
How was it for you?
It was good until that bowling pizza beer party. That was really hard to figure out.
In terms of like how many calories? Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So basically, you had the hard thing was you couldn't figure out how many calories and protein and whatnot it was worth. Okay, gotcha. Okay. How about you guys? I saw you nod your heads that you've done it before.
I tried using MyFitnessPal.
Yeah.
But my problem was that I didn't know the portions.
Yeah. So you had a hard time estimating portion size? Okay. And so then it made it, of course, difficult to use.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We can talk a little bit about some ideas for that. How about you?
I've done somewhere, you write down what you're eating and how you're feeling when you eat, or how
Right.
so then you can tell if you're emotional eating or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was okay. It just seemed like a lot of work. So I use MyFitnessPal, but I do measure my protein portions and other stuff I estimate. Or like I'll take half a cup of brown rice, so I know exactly how much I'm eating. But that's painful too. After a while, it's
To measure it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that the measuring piece, the only time I really advocate for measuring is when we're trying to learn what a given
Size,
portion looks like on a plate. And from there, a teaspoon one direction or another is not going to hurt us.
No.
So, it can start to feel like oppressive, right? And the idea is to liberate.
Yeah.
And that comes back to this idea of tuning in to what are our signals telling us. Sometimes our signals are thrown off by stress, like we've just talked about. But then that process of tuning in helps us to be aware that, stress is really affecting me. How can I manage this? And that then leads to perhaps other strategies. But the reason that we talk about keeping a food log is that there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that it actually really benefits people that are interested in improving their weight, improving their body composition, and improving their health through nutrition. The research evidence indicates that people on average lose about twice as much weight if they maintain a food log as people who don't during a process of sort of working on that bit, working on weight loss. And it's not something that one has to do for life. It's something that is an exercise, for example, this 10 weeks of AbDom is sort of a reset. And so we're focusing on these strategies as a way to kick us off on maybe in a different direction, or help us to hone in on some specific goals that we're working on health-wise or fitness-wise. And so this exercise can take your nutrition work to the next level in terms of really keenly focusing your awareness on what it is that's actually happening. Other things that nutrition studies tell us is that we chronically forget what we've eaten. If you take like a sort of photographic log of what a person eats over a couple of days, and you ask them afterwards what they ate, they will always underestimate. So when we think about why am I not achieving this goal? Why is it that I want to get down to this certain body fat percentage, or I want to get down to this certain weight, and I'm not achieving it. I feel like I'm doing all the right things. When we take a look at the food log, we can really get a frank and honest peek into what's actually happening nutritionally. So it's an investigation. It's a chance to be a scientist. We investigate, we observe, and we adjust. And it can take a little bit of that emotion out of it in terms of the dietary stuff, because food is emotional. Food is absolutely emotional. We all have our favorite comfort foods, and I bet they're all different, and I bet they all have specific, very meaningful stories attached to them. And so it's important to honor that, and it's okay to enjoy those foods in moderation. And so that's why we pulled in sort of like a recreational meal or a recreational day of eating into the program. So when we work and practice these ideas of mindfulness and really trusting the body to tell us what it is that's working for us and what it is that's not, then it is liberating. But it does take practice, and it takes time.
Is there also evidence that just keeping a food journal can change your behavior?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. So, even though in the beginning, for example, when I work with a patient, I might say like, try not to change anything at first. Let's see what you're actually doing. They're going to change something.
Right.
Because why? Just being aware, just focusing awareness and consciousness.
Right.
Putting pencil to paper engages that smart brain.
That brings us right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Mindful eating.
Exactly. So, no, it's absolutely true. So, even just keeping a food record, not trying to change anything, you'll change something, and it's likely to be for the better. So, yes.
In the food record, would you like us to have portions or just a listing of what we ate? Yesterday, I just threw out what I ate. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, portions are really helpful, partly because if we don't see the portion matters, right? The portion matters in terms of the quantity that we're eating, and therefore the caloric load of the diet and all that. So, and then also, it's not just about calories. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about how different macronutrients affect us differently. Protein calories are, 100 calories of protein is the same as 100 calories of carbohydrate in terms of calories, but in terms of how it affects us hormonally and satiation-wise, totally different. But it is important in terms of figuring out how your food habits are affecting your goals. The portion matters. So in terms of estimating portion size, of course, if you're working with something like MyFitnessPal and you're trying to figure out how many calories and how much protein and et cetera is in 3/4 of a cup of XYZ, you kind of have to know how to estimate that. And it can be helpful to work with measuring cups in the beginning. I hate telling people to measure and weigh. However, just to get a familiarity with what things look like, it can be really useful just as a temporary experiment. Please don't level off the teaspoon the rest of your lives. But it does help. For example, when I work with diabetic patients on carb portion control, we count carbs in 15-gram units, and 15 grams of rice is 1/3 of a cup. And 1/3 of a cup on a plate looks like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like this
really small.
tiny amount. And it's shocking to people. Like, oh, wow. So, like, this bowl of rice I'm eating has, like, 8 carb choices, when I should be having 2 to 4. And so it is eye-opening and helpful to us to know that. And it's not, it's not that we have to necessarily eat less. Round out the plate with veggies. Put some delicious, olive oil-based dressing on it, and make it tasty. I love roasting veggies as opposed to steaming. I mean, they get such a better flavor. So there are lots of ways to prepare the food to make it really taste great, and still support our health goals. But in any case, there are other tools that we can use to estimate portion size. I mentioned using the body as a portion size estimator. Where are we on time?
I don't know.
Time 7.
It's 7? Okay. So on a final
We started
note,
a little late though.
Okay. Well, on the note of sort of using more practical tools that we have on hand all the time, look up online, portion size estimation with hand, or like hand portion sizes. you'll find that, for most people the fist is about a cup, although if you have large hands, some men have
And you're lucky.
hands. But in that case, yeah. And so in that case, think about a baseball. A baseball is about a cup. A softball is about 2 cups. A golf ball is about 2 tablespoons. So if you can imagine the sizes of those balls. The thumb from the second knuckle down to the tip is about a tablespoon. From the first knuckle up is about a teaspoon. And so if your fist is about a cup, then halfway up the fist is about a half a cup. And so you can kind of use your fingers in that way as well. So in the middle of the middle knuckles, it's half a cup. Up one, it's 3/4. And so we can utilize. And then the standard serving size of meat, 3 ounces, which is the size of most palms without the thumb and the fingers. And 3 to 6 ounces of meat for a meal or other protein rich food is a good serving. So we'll talk more about those macronutrient proportions like I said, in the next talk. Any other questions, comments? And I'm happy to hang out if people have individual questions they want to ask.
I read that over time people start underestimating the size if they're looking at it visually, and then they start like overeating because they're underestimating the size of half a cup or.
Yeah.
So
It's
we
definitely
need a reset every once in a while.
That is true.
Just
Yeah.
Take measurements.
Yeah, and if you are curious about how your fist relates to a cup, measure a cup or something out and see what it looks like. Try to stick your fist in that cup. But yeah, it's a really good point that sometimes we do need a little recheck.
Yeah.
I was talking to Amber earlier today. Do you think exercise depletes iron?
Does exercise deplete iron? No, not to my knowledge. Yeah, I mean, unless you're bleeding.
It's bruising a lot.
Oh, I'll have to. I'm not remembering what sort of micronutrient things can impact bruising susceptibility, but to my knowledge, it's not a major factor. And to my knowledge,
unless you drop
anything about
the
exercise.
weights on yourself.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know, just bruising.
Yeah, I mean, I can look into that for you, but I don't know that unless you're like seriously malnourished, I don't know that there's a nutritional deficiency that would necessarily be the culprit. Yeah. Exercise can cause especially intense exercise can cause other sort of random lab abnormalities temporarily, but iron is not one that I'm aware of that would be affected. Yeah.
I have one more question about on rule number 2, you're talking about cottage cheese, and you say full fat plain yogurt. Is that for satiation? Is that what?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that makes it a whole food.
Yeah. Because I have Greek yogurt, but I usually get the 0% or 2%.
It's going to be less, in my experience, it's going to be less satiating in the
less
long
tasty.
haul. And less tasty, absolutely. I think the full fat one. I
Less
like it,
satisfying.
Like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
And
And was it you who were saying there was full fat Greek yogurt at?
Yes.
You were saying
No,
that.
I wasn't.
Somebody told me there was full fat Greek yogurt now at Costco in case you need a whole bunch of it.
nice.
Yes.
that size.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I guess the reason I wasn't eating a whole lot was I was worried about heart health and cholesterol and
Yeah, I
but
mean,
next time I guess.
there are many factors, and there can be individual responses to the amount of saturated fat in the diet, but probably a stronger factor is the amount of exercise one gets, weight status, actually refined carbs make a big difference, the amount of fiber and vegetables in the diet. So, that's one of the more contentious areas of nutrition, and I tend to land on the side of saturated fat probably isn't the most fruitful area to focus all of our attention. Yeah. Did you have
Anyone
questions?
Not exactly. I feel like I have one, but I don't.
Okay. Well, if you're crazy, just let me know.
You probably do have one.
Yeah. Do we have an idea of what the next talk will be?
what the next talk will be?
Yeah, I forget.
We're
What were
going
you
to
thinking?
go into macronutrients. So we're going to talk about protein, fats, carbohydrates, healthy choices within each group, the differential effects that those foods have on our appetites, for example, and then on different aspects of metabolism. And we will talk about sort of balancing among those groups on the plate. And I want to say that there was one more topic that we were going to talk about in the next round. And
We can send out an email,
yeah.
just like kind of summing up, share a link to this video, and talk about what's coming next. And then maybe a little worksheet for what we mentioned in the beginning. So like
For identifying sort of
Yeah,
the triggers for emotional,
personal
substantial eating, that,
Yeah.
and then sort of working on
Strategies for coping.
coping mechanisms, exactly, tools.
Sounds good.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank
It's been a
you,
pleasure.
Trina. That was great.
If anyone has any individual questions, feel free to come see me after class.